and good morning. It's lovely to be here. I'm afraid I'm going to have to speak in English because otherwise it would be a very short conversation if I was to use my Thai. Thank you very much to KBANK for having me here today. I used to work with Thai Union, so I actually lived in Thailand for many years. I moved here in 2015 to work for Thai Union, as I'm sure you know, one of the largest seafood processors in the world. Living in Thailand taught me many things. It taught me to be humble. It taught me about respect, and respect for people and for nature. I've always been a sustainability professional, but it was working with Thai Union that I really got to understand how businesses can put sustainability into practice, which is very much what I'm going to speak to you about today. So when I moved here in 2015 with my family, my young family, the country was in crisis over seafood and fishing. We've already heard from one of the speakers this morning about the red card and IUU fishing. So I came here and seafood and sustainability was on the front page of the newspaper almost every day, whether it was to do with abuse of migrant workers in factories, or it might have been people on ghost ships that were out in the Gulf of Thailand. There were so many different issues, and we had what we call non-tariff trade barriers. So we heard mention about the red card from the European Union on Thailand as a country for IUU fishing, or illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing. The United States had another different kind of ban, which was against forced labor. So it was called the TIP report, the Trafficking in Persons report. Greenpeace, an NGO, had a global campaign against the seafood sector. We had journalists coming and writing award-winning papers about migrant workers coming to Thailand who perhaps were not treated as well as they could be from Myanmar, and also it got caught up with the issues around Rohingya. It was constantly in crisis. But from that crisis, we needed to come up with a strategy and a plan. And that's where I want to speak to you today. We're in a similar kind of crisis today with climate change and climate finance. How do we go from the chaos of all of these different regulations that we're seeing to having a strategic, clear approach to where we want to get to? And so I'll speak to you today about a three-step plan, P-R-O. So P is for purpose. Be clear on your purpose. R is for risk, to manage all of your risks. And O is for opportunity, and how you can take the opportunities that this crisis or this risk brings. Now, at the end of my time with Thai Union, because we'd done so much work on sustainability, we were able to access sustainable finance, which was very important. It was based on the ESG data, or all of the key performance indicators that we'd collected over the previous few years, that in 2021, Thai Union was issued the first sustainability-linked loan, or really it was a blue loan for the sustainability work that we'd been doing. And this work really helped to pique my interest in sustainable finance and how we can transition to a low-carbon future. After Thai Union, I joined the Monetary Authority of Singapore, which is partly where I'm going to bring my perspectives today. So looking at working for a Thai corporate, working for a central bank and regulator, but also I work with the London School of Economics and Political Science, and so it's looking at how, from an academic perspective, we consider transition. So we can see here that I think sustainable finance really took centre stage in the world at COP26. So that's the Conference of the Parties to talk about climate change. This conference took place in Glasgow. And for the first time, you had this big pledge at that time of more than 450 financial institutions, so banks, insurers, asset managers, asset owners, investors, all coming together and committing to net zero by 2050. And you can see that there's a quote here from Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, saying there's not a system today where private capital can be rapidly deployed. A union of public and private is needed to quickly put capital to work financing climate change. And we need to reimagine finance. Now, I think that is really inspirational about what finance can do and the role that finance can play. So when we looked at Thai Union at sustainability-linked finance, I found that not many of the banks, and we syndicated that loan across 21 different financial institutions, really understood the oceans, the ocean economy, or sustainability. We're in a very different position here now. We've heard wonderful speeches from KBANK. The financial institutions do understand about climate change and transition. But from a business perspective, you have to be clear on the purpose and what you're trying to achieve. And so partly I'll bring in what MAS was doing to help bring that cohesion in Singapore to the financial sector. I should also say that for Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, there's now over 550 institutions, and actually there is an Asian hub which is based in Singapore. And the director of that hub used to work here in Thailand, and so you do have a resource for moving towards net zero for finance that is specifically for this region. So when we talk about transition, what do we actually mean? I mean, transition at its most basic is a process from move from one stage to the other. So if you just look at this image here, perhaps we have grey, maybe they've got the haze here that's causing the sky to be grey. We need to think about where we are now and where we want to get to in the future. And you can see in this image, we want to have renewable energy. Perhaps we want to have electric vehicles. Maybe we want to make sure that no people are left behind, that the disabled, the young, the elderly, women, SMEs, everybody comes on that journey with us, and that we have nature as part of that transition. So when I'm speaking about transition finance, I'm speaking about all of those different issues. It's not just about climate and measuring carbon. It is about how you transition society and the economy to a more sustainable future. And so that's where we come back to the purpose. The purpose of transition is to make sure we can transition smoothly and bring everybody with us to that low carbon future. As we saw from one of the slides earlier, Thailand is actually one of the most vulnerable countries in the world to climate change. I think I saw from a presentation that was 9 out of the top 10. There's a real imperative for why Thailand needs to transition and why we need everybody here in the room, all businesses as well as financial institutions and the government, to go on this journey together. Now this slide looks at the capital that's needed for Asia to transition. And this is a slide from McKinsey, and I know McKinsey are doing some thought leadership workshops this afternoon at the session today. And they helped the MAS, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, in their thinking about how to look at transition finance and where to focus. So you can see on the top row, it's the capital that's needed to transition some of the key sectors: power, transportation, building, agriculture. And then underneath you can see the amount of greenhouse gas emissions by tonne for each of those sectors. So yes, the power system, the energy system has the greatest need for investment, but also the greatest greenhouse gas emissions. But you have many other sectors. Industry. Thailand is an industrial sector. Agriculture, also very important. And what you find out about agriculture, industry, new fuels, they actually rely on all of the other sectors. They're all interrelated. And so we can't just look at transition finance for one sector only. We can't only focus on power. We need to look at how each sector can work together to collaborate. It's almost like the film that won an Oscar this year, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. We need to make sure that we look at all of the different sectors of the economy to transition. If we look at sustainability-linked loans and green finance, this is a summary of green finance. Over its lifetime, green, sustainability, social-linked loans and bonds had topped US $3.7 trillion by the end of 2022. So this is big business. There is a lot of money flowing through green financial instruments. But what you find is that they're all reliant on ESG data. So ESG, environment, social, governance data, it's the pieces of information on which you can decide whether something is sustainable or moving in the right direction, which is the transition. And so what we're seeing now is that there's been a long history of green bonds and social bonds, and now the sustainability-linked bonds. But what we're starting to see is transition bonds, where you have investment, particularly into companies, but also into assets that are moving towards net zero. So a lot of those rules are still being written. The UK government, for example, has a transition planning task force. Singapore is investing a lot in looking at transition, Japan also. And we're starting to think, what does it take to move the whole economy from one to the other? All of those sectors that I just saw, whether it's energy or agriculture or transport, and we need to move them along. So rather than talking about this in theory, I thought I'd take it into practice to look at one sector in particular. So how would a sector like the agricultural sector transition towards net zero? And this is a report that was recently released, looking at the global footprint of the food system. So this isn't just specifically for Thailand. Why do we look at agriculture? You saw that was perhaps not the biggest dot on the map that I previously showed you for financing requirements. But all of us here today eat, I'm sure, multiple times a day. There's so much great food in Thailand. Everybody needs food. If you don't have food, actually society will start to break down. We've seen the global shocks that have happened following the war in the Ukraine when food systems were interrupted. And you need to be able to invest in food systems now so that you have them robust and strong in the future. So as you can see here, agriculture, the global agricultural system, taking into account all of the different sectors, whether it's the transport of the food from the farm to the factory, whether it's the shipping of food from, let's say, Thailand to the United States, it accounts for up to 34% of global greenhouse gas emissions. That's massive. And when you add on food waste, which is actually the final indicator there, it can be even greater. So we not only need to make the food system more energy efficient, but we also need to make sure that we waste less food. We need to look at species and nature. So agriculture is actually heavily reliant on nature, whether we're looking at rainfall or temperature, whether we're looking at pollinators like butterflies or bees, or looking at larger species which also have a role to play in the ecosystem. We need to make sure that finance is flowing towards programs that support nature. And then you've got the human impact. So I said we all need to eat, but health is a huge global issue. If people can't have access to healthy food, actually that's another big impact on the economy, because then you will need to have more healthcare treatment. And so we need healthy food to make sure that people can continue to work and live their lives. We also start to look at things like packaging. I can remember when I was living here in 2018 that a whale washed up on the beach in Songkhla. Can you remember this? It was in all of the news, and that whale actually died, and it was found with 8 kilograms of plastic in its stomach. It had died of starvation because there was so much plastic. Now that, I think, started a revolution in Thailand of people thinking we can't have so much single-use plastic. And this does relate to food, because the first campaign was to do with straws, then it went to looking at plastic water bottles, and all of the food companies and the petrochemical companies needed to start to think about different food systems. When I come back to Thailand now, I'm heartened to see almost all drinks are served in glass or aluminium recyclable packaging. You see a lot more recyclable packaging in use and a lot less single-use plastic. If we look to a crisis that we're having right now around air quality, it also can link back to agriculture. I think just last week I read a headline about a panda that died in the zoo in Chiang Mai. And there are suspicions that perhaps the bad air quality in Chiang Mai at the moment had an impact on whether the panda, would have lived a little bit longer or indeed died early. Now, not all of that can be traced back to agriculture, but there certainly are links between the haze and air quality and agricultural practices. So this is where we need to start thinking of everything, everywhere, all at once, and the interrelations between these systems. So if we look at the financing that's required, we need large-scale financing. We have large companies, but actually the agricultural sector is made up of a huge number of small smallholders, small individual companies, and supply chain partners. So how can we look at fractionalizing sustainable finance? Not everybody needs a multi-billion-dollar loan. Actually, some need access to small amounts of finance. Perhaps it's to install solar energy. Maybe it's for more energy production practices. Maybe it's for training. But we need to be able to have supply chain finance if we're going to move the whole system. But then going back to my idea of having PRO, you need to have your purpose of where you're going to, but then you need to have your way to manage your risks and opportunities. So here are some suggestions from this report that I've sourced from. And they have a process, stopping deforestation, stopping food loss, but there are very specific things that are recommended to do to transition the system. And this is what you need to do in all of your businesses. It can't just be general, it does need to be broken down into specific system-wide projects. And we need to be sustainable. So I'm sure you've all recognized these. These are UN Sustainable Development Goals, but it's split out into what's called the wedding cake, the 3 levels. So the economy is the top level, but it's actually the smallest. And then we have society, and then we have the biosphere. So that's all of nature. If we only look at carbon in transition, we're only looking at one part of that very bottom layer. And what we need to do is to be able to consider how you can transition across all 3 levels of this. So I mentioned that I work with the London School of Economics now. And one of the things they are doing is looking at a just nature transition. So what does that mean in terms of transition finance? It means that not only are we looking at finance flowing towards low carbon, but also to make sure there's decent work, there's social inclusion, we have eradication of poverty, and that nature is prioritized. So the areas they're looking at are sustainable food and agriculture systems, ending deforestation, scaling up nature-based solutions, and I've certainly heard that this morning, particularly when looking at carbon and carbon markets, and restoring ocean ecosystems. Thailand has some of the most beautiful beaches and ocean ecosystems in the world. We know that the oceans are an essential part of climate change. Oceans absorb 90% of CO2 emissions and regulate the Earth's temperatures. So we need to start to take into account all of these different aspects. So this could be the purpose and how Thailand and Thai companies start to look at what a transition would mean in practice. Let's move beyond purpose and start to look at the opportunities. And so I saw this graph recently. It was in a newspaper called Eco-Business, and it's based on Eco-Business and, again, McKinsey data, looking at the opportunities for growth in a low-carbon future. So we can see here, manufacturing of renewable energy technology could be worth up to $200 billion in revenue by 2050 in this region, and creating up to 6 million jobs. It isn't all downside looking at a low-carbon future. It is about having that balance and changing towards those new opportunities. I was reading that Delta Electronics Thailand is now the most valuable company on the SET. It's risen 163% in its shares. So that's amazing, and that's on the basis, actually, of the plans to double their EV business. The most valuable stock on the Stock Exchange of Thailand, because it's investing in an EV future. This is what I mean about the opportunities, and that all businesses should look for what the opportunities are as they look to transition. There's a lot of regulations that are coming out, and they've also been touched on. A lot of these rely on ESG data, but it still comes back to managing your risks and opportunities. So the top ones, you have the International Sustainability Standards Board, or ISSB. That will be really the governing principles that a lot of financial regulations will be aligned with. With the European Union, you also have the Sustainable Finance Directive, you have the Sustainability Reporting Directive. So you're going to have several of these high-level reporting frameworks. And of course, you have the EU taxonomy for where sustainable finance should be directed. We also have an ASEAN taxonomy in this region, and different countries have their own taxonomies. Under that, you have the reporting frameworks. whether that is CDP or TCFD, which is Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, the Global Reporting Initiative. Many companies, certainly those listed on the Stock Exchange of Thailand, are already reporting against these frameworks. But under that, you have a lot of data that's required to report on these frameworks. And if you're a larger company, you rely on your smaller companies and your suppliers to get that data. Below that, you have all of the goals. And then you have emerging standards, and we heard about these this morning, whether it's carbon border adjustment mechanisms, whether it's the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures and how you report on nature. Maybe it's to do with forced labour and the US import requirements or modern slavery acts, or it could be deforestation. All of these impacts will be hitting businesses, particularly as they export out of Thailand. And so that's where you need to think of a future-ready business and what you want to achieve. And it can get so confusing. So you don't need to be able to see all of these. I just thought I would put it up there. There's an estimate that there's over 2,000 different reporting frameworks, which all have different requirements and methodologies, and within there, 1,424 different key performance indicators. That's crazy. That's so much information. But you need to have a system and a way to get to manage all of this data. And this is where technology comes in, and I know that's where KBANK is very strong. There are now ways to use technology platforms to help gather all of this data and to share it, whether it's to share it to the banks, whether it's to share it to regulators, or to share it with supply chain partners. And I think Asia is actually going to leapfrog the US and the European Union. When I think of when I first started doing sustainability reporting back in the early 2000s, I'd go with an Excel spreadsheet and a notebook and go and ask different parts of the business, what their energy consumption was, for example. Now there are platforms where the data can be automated, and then reporting can also be automated. And I can see that the countries in this region are really starting to lead the way. But we still need to keep in mind purpose. So you can see from this graphic, we have a lot of net zero goals. We have ESG reports. We have all different sustainability jargon. Events like this. But are we actually doing anything? And that's where we need to turn the ideas into action. So I've been asked to speak briefly about the Singapore approach to transition finance. And where it comes from is the Singapore Green Plan. So Singapore announced in 2019 the Green Plan 2030. And what that does is go across the whole of the economy, the whole of Singapore, and look in a structured way of what they want to achieve. So city and nature is very much around urban planning. How are we going to make our cities livable? That could be more parks, it could be more shaded areas, but a way that people can live in nature. Sustainable living is very much about how people and individuals live their lives. So what can you do to enable all individual people, customers, consumers to live sustainably? The energy reset is looking at the energy systems. The green economy, which is where I worked, which was very much around sustainable finance, but also carbon markets. And then the resilient future. What do you need to do for adaptation and mitigation to make sure that as the impacts of climate change are felt, you can actually transition? Now, I'm not saying that Thailand is the same as Singapore, but what I would say is that it helps to have a whole of government and whole of industry approach to move towards the same directions where you can understand how you fit together. Now, just last week, the MAS, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, revised their Green Finance Action Plan to the Finance for Net Zero Action Plan. And you can see these details here today. So the key points that they're looking at are data, definitions and disclosures. That's going back to what I just spoke about, ESG data. You have to have good quality data to make sure that you're transitioning and you're in the right direction. Then we're looking at climate resilient finance and banking. Are you doing stress testing? Are you doing risk analysis of financial instruments? Have all different companies who are being financed done environmental risk assessments? Transition planning, aligning with science-based targets and making sure the whole economy is transitioning towards net zero, but as I said, in a just way. And also MAS are looking at regional sectoral pathways for this. So not just for Singapore, but of course so much of our economies are intertwined in ASEAN. How can that work across the region? And finally, the markets, whether that's building up blended finance, the carbon markets or green loans. So another aspect is that Singapore has partnered with several large academic institutions to create institutes for green and sustainable finance. And I think this is an opportunity for Thailand as well. You could partner with local and international organizations to make a hub to bring together all of the different people who are working on this. And actually in Singapore, there has been a lot of work to building an ESG ecosystem. So you can see here, the center picture is the Singapore FinTech Festival. You'll later hear from Stax. I know Kun Sharon is here today, who've helped to do some of the integration between work doing in Singapore and in Thailand across the region. You can see I was speaking on a panel with ministers recently talking about what they're doing for sustainable finance in the green economy. And we opened up an ESG impact hub. So bringing all of these different networks together, and I know in Thailand you have UNSCAP working on networks, you have EGAT, you have the Thai Supply Chain Network, you have the UN Global Compact Network. Somehow bring all of these together to make sure there is consistency here for the ecosystem and for purpose. So I thought, because people often say to me, how do you bring all of this together? What are the steps? So I've mapped out a really simple way to take you from, I don't know what I'm doing, to that more sustainable future. First of all, identify your most material issues. What is meaningful to you as a company? Who are your stakeholders? Is it your investors? Is it your consumers? Is it your staff? Understand the regulatory landscape. You've heard several people talk about changing regulations today, not just in Thailand, in the region and globally. Map out your business risks. If nothing else, sustainability should be about managing those business risks. Identify your allies. Maybe it's your bank, maybe it's your regulator, maybe it's your customers, but work with people who want to work with you. Set your goals and measure progress. And those goals and the progress will help you generate the ESG data that's then going to help you get access to sustainable finance. Communicate and engage. Tell people what you're doing. Bring them on the journey with you. And then review and adjust. Things are changing all the time. You can't set it once and assume that will get you to net zero by 2050. You should be constantly measuring performance and adjusting that journey. And then hopefully you'll be transitioning to a sustainable future. Now briefly, we're here today with KBANK. Obviously, they are the bank of sustainability. And one of the things I really like about the KBANK strategy, and I'll let them speak more about it, is that they look to empower every customer for life and business. So it is about people and it is about transition. And also that focus on people, technology and talent. So those are going to be the enablers. In that way, it's quite similar to what MAS is looking at with the enablers of skills and technology. So this is how you're actually going to transition a whole system. And I know that KBANK are also active throughout the region. Last year, I had the honor of moderating a panel with Katya speaking about financing climate change and whether it would be profitable. KBANK are leaders in this region in their approach to sustainability, and it's an opportunity for you to partner with a leading financial institution to think about how your businesses can become more sustainable. Now, I thought I would end with a very brief story about butterfly pea. So when I lived in Thailand, obviously the purple drinks, the purple food that comes from the butterfly pea flowers, they're ubiquitous, they're everywhere. And when I moved here, my daughter was only 5 years old, and she heard of butterfly pea. We all knew what it was. Recently, we went on holidays and was served a glass of juice with butterfly pea in it, the beautiful purple colour. And I said to her, "Do you remember butterfly pea flowers from Thailand?" She said, "Yeah, I remember." And I said, "Okay." So in English, butterfly pea is PEA, meaning a legume. So I knew it was about the plant. We had grown the plant. And she said to me, because she's much older now, I don't get how they collect all the butterfly pee. And she thought butterfly drinks were made from butterfly urine or chi. And I think this is where we can sometimes have a common understanding, but we don't all do the same thing. So remember, purpose, risk, and opportunity, and I wish you every success in moving towards a sustainable future. Thank you.
กสิกรไทยบริการทุกระดับประทับใจ